Hello and welcome back. This is Dawn with another video for Picket Fence Studios. So today we have a long one, my friends, a very long one. Grab yourself a drink, grab yourself a snack, and we are going to dive right in, no pun intended, to this underwater scene. All right, so Picket Fence just had a new release and it's all ocean themed. You've got this beautiful little octopus here. That's you occupy my thoughts. We've got seahorses of the sea. We have the seashells waiting to be found. Each of these have a coordinating die available as well. This gorgeous little sea turtle journey. Absolutely love this. And then this great little background that kind of mixes everything. There's a couple other items in here again that it's all ocean themed. I absolutely love this release, but this octopus right here, I could not wait to color him. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to color him not once, but twice in two different ways. And we are going to focus on getting that underwater glow. All right, so I've sped this up to twice the speed. If you want it to go slower, you can always use your YouTube controls to slow it down, but do me a favor and mute it if you do that. I don't want to hear my voice when it gets slowed down, I can only imagine. But if I'm going too fast for you, go ahead and slow it down. I've stamped this in a no line color ink here, and we are getting ready to color. So here on the screen, I've got my colors, Y06, YR04, BG02, BG07, RV23, RV25, and RV66. Now, when I first decided to color this octopus, I did look up some images of octopi, octopodes, octopuses, however you say multiple octopus, the plural of octopus. That's a whole nother debate. If you want to geek out, Google the proper plural of octopus and you've got a nice little rabbit hole to go down. For the sake of this video, I think we're going to go with octopuses. But I looked up octopus and came across bioluminescent octopus. And it's an octopus that glows, but he's not super colorful. Like we're going to end up making this first octopus. So when I saw that glow, I knew that I wanted a more of a magical fantasy underwater scene. So I just decided to go all out. We're going to do a rainbow octopus here that looks as if he emits a glow. So here I'm starting with the head, and I'm starting with the yellows and the oranges into the pinks. I want the central area of his head to glow the brightest, so I'm using the yellow there, and then I'm going to fade that into the orange, and then that's going to go into the pink. So since the top of his head is round, I started off with a circle, and now I'm breaking out that circle because I do not want this to look orb-like. I do want it to still look as if the octopus has some sort of texture to his skin, because he does. And so I'm flicking a little bit of orange into that yellow and then blending that out with the yellow so that we get more of a little bit of a looks like texture versus just like a shiny glass orb. Then I'm going to use that pink here around the edges because it's going to be a little bit darker there. He's underwater and everything around him, if he was deep in the ocean, would be very, very dark. And it would actually be the glow from him and his bioluminescence that would be creating the light. So I'm going to keep working around this, blending the yellow, the orange, and the pink. And as I come down here toward the middle of where his head attaches to those tentacles, I'm going to start moving into a purple, the RV. This is where the octopus is going to be the darkest, where all of these things are meeting. So his head is meeting and his tentacles are meeting up. And in my mind, I'm imagining that the glow is emitting from his head and his tentacles. So that's going to be the brightest spot. I'm going to continue working my way down into right into the eye area and where all of the tentacles come in. And I'm going to continue working back and forth, blending between that pink into the orange into the yellow. Then I'm going to move from the pink into the purple into my blues. So I am going in rainbow order here. It's as if I've started from yellow and I'm working my way around the wheel backwards. So I'm going from yellow to orange to a reddish pink to a purple to a blue. So it is all still in proper rainbow order. All right, I have sped this up now to 3 times the speed. We're going to move just a little bit quicker because this is a dance back and forth between just laying down some color and then blending it in with the previous colors. And I go back and forth usually between 2 and 3 colors. So here I'm going to start laying in that RV66, but I'm not just going to lay in a solid line of that RV. I'm going to break it up with some of the RV25. So we're still in the RV family, the red violet, just one leans more pink, one leans more purple. So again, I'm going to break that up. You'll see me in here. I'm adding in some darker spots underneath his eyes and around the sides of his body here. And then I'm using the lighter RV25 to pull that RV66 out and blend between them. Like I said, I want this to be a nice gradation of colors. I don't want any hard walls of color. And so by bringing that purple down into the pink and the pink up into the purple so that there is no hard delineation between the two, we're merging the two, and it's going to end up looking more seamless this way. But that does mean we have to keep going back and forth, back and forth. Here you can see I'm adding in that RV23. This is going to give me some highlights. So right now, the way we're working, even just right here, you can see the highlights of the RV23. You can see the shadows of the RV66 and then the midtones of the RV25. I'm concentrating that RV66 like at the base of his tentacles here. And then I'm using the RV25 to come up from those sides. And then I'll use that RV23 on the top. Now, eventually, his tentacles are going to turn to a blue. So it looks as if I'm coloring these all pink, but I'm going to come over these with a blue, which is going to give me even more purple because pink and blue is going to give us purple. So here you can see I'm pulling in that BGO2, and where the BGO2 is on the top of the tentacle, it's a bright blue, which is going to give us that nice glow. And where it goes over the RV25 and the RV26, it creates a nice deep plummy purple, a blue purple. So right there, automatically, we've got our shadow and our shading by just glazing that BGO2 over top of those pinks, those RVs. It's kind of magical the way that happens. I just used those RVs to map in my shadows, and then I ran the BGO2 over the entire tentacle. That gave me my blue glowing tentacle that turns into this nice violet purple in the shaded areas. And again, this will be a dance back and forth to marry these colors and make them look like it's one color. So I'll keep working these, again, like I said, back and forth. It's a dance back and forth. Now where we had a whole lot of that pink, we're coming over with those BGs again, and it's going to turn it to a violet. Anywhere that I feel like that BGO2 is bleaching out the pinks too much, I'll just glaze another layer of that RV25 over top, and it'll resaturate that color. Don't be afraid to mix your colors. That's one thing that I have learned with Copics, because they are a transparent medium, and because they have different levels of solvent in each color. If you play with your markers, you will really be able to figure out which colors you can layer together to create new colors, and which colors you can use to kind of bleach out other colors. So if a marker is, for instance, the BGO2, it is it's a very saturated blue, but it's a 0, so that means it's the brightest, and which means its saturation level, and it's a 2, which means that's its level of shade or its level of depth in the color. So it has a lot of solvent, less of the actual ink or the alcohol ink, and more of the alcohol, the solvent. That's what makes it lighter. And if you add more solvent to a darker color, that color is going to get lighter. So that's why you can usually bleach or pool colors with a lighter marker. And I do that a lot in my Copic coloring. I can come in with a pretty dark color, so like say that RV66, and then I could use like an RV02 or a 04 to pull that 66 out. And it's going to create a really pretty transition without needing all of those markers in between those two. So here you can see I'm just continuing to work around and color in all of the tentacles. I'm making sure to leave the tops of the tentacles very bright. And then again, using just that RV66, the RV25, and the BGO2 to create this depth in those tentacles. At some point, I do come in with the BG07. You can see I just used it right there. So the BG07 and the RV25 together created an even deeper, darker purple, and I'm using that for the back tentacles and anywhere that the tentacles are in deeper shadow. So here you can see me adding this around the side, and it's creating some really good depth and different levels of shadows within the image. So it's really making those tentacles appear that some are in the front, some are in the side, and some are in the back. Don't forget that your shadows will have different levels of depth, just as your highlights will. So like I said, this is just my practice run, and I honestly wasn't 100% satisfied with this when I finished it. I was squeezing this in between going back and forth to the hospital. I don't do story time, you guys. If you want good story time, Kelly Taylor is your girl for that. In fact, she just did a Olo marker of the sea turtle. I will link that in my description box if you want to see maybe a different approach to alcohol markers. If that's something that you want to see, make sure you check the description box below. It turned out absolutely beautiful. But she does really good story time. I'm just going to briefly say that I was fitting this in between running back and forth to the hospital. My husband was in the hospital, and he's good. He's okay. But we had a scare there for like 4 days. And so I was fitting this in between going to the hospital, well, the ER for a full day, and then going back and forth from home to the hospital for the next like 3 days. So the footage is getting, it may be a little broken up, and I do apologize for that, but I did record almost everything. This octopus right here that we're coloring now took me, this portion of the video was 47 minutes. So I want to say that if I'm looking at the footage here, this octopus probably took me about 55 minutes to do total. So less than an hour to color this guy, which I don't think is too bad. Although I do think that my Copic coloring days are numbered, you guys. When I got done with both of these cards, my hands were killing me, especially my thumb knuckle. I think that I may be getting arthritis in my thumbs. I could barely move them. My son, he was like, well, can't you just change your grip? And I said, well, yeah, I could change my grip, but that means I'm going to have to change my technique. So hopefully I can come up with something, changing my grip, maybe changing up my technique to where I can still use those markers, because I do really love Copic coloring. So I did want to add some green into this. You'll notice there in the back of that tentacle, that very back tentacle, I added a little bit of yellow over that blue. And for me, I was thinking if his head is glowing this yellow light, I thought, well, there would be some reflection of that yellow onto his blue tentacles. So I glazed over with a little bit of yellow and it turned it green. I don't know that it quite gave the right look. I think if I would have done that area full yellow without that blue under it, I think that would have worked out better. But you know, hey, like I said, this was my first run and I don't think it turned out too bad. In the overall finished thing, once I had already added in that green, I just decided to run with it. And I made sure to glaze a little bit of yellow at the tips of some of the tentacles so that you still had that green running throughout. And it looks like it still makes sense. It doesn't look like a boo-boo once I do it to each tentacle. You'll notice that I haven't done it to each tentacle yet because I'm still thinking in my head like, oh no, I don't think I like that. I don't think that's what I was going for. But sometimes that happens, you guys. And if you do something like that, make it look intentional. Do it again. If you do something like what I did there, here you can see I'm like, all right, I'm going to try it with just the yellow first, and then I'm going to run the blue. And that made it a much brighter green, which I don't know if that was the right move either. However, you got to try things. So eventually what I did end up doing, as I've told you before, and as I tell myself, if you make a boo-boo, turn it into something that looks intentional, just repeat it somewhere else in the image, and it will no longer look like a boo-boo. It'll look like it was intentional. We didn't have any green represented in our octopus at all. So at least this way we've got all of the colors represented, and it doesn't look like a mistake in the end. So we are nearing the end of the tentacles here. I'm just going to continue deepening up anything that needs to be deepened up, brightening up anything that needs to be brightened, and then we will eventually be tackling the suckers underneath and the eyes. You'll notice that I have left the eyes blank for now. I honestly wasn't sure what I was going to do, and I decided not to mess with it until I had a game plan. Because the eyes really are look, when you're doing animals, if you get nothing else right, get the eyes right. That's as people, as humans, that's the first thing we look at in live things. Anything that's alive, the first thing we're drawn to are the eyes. So if you can capture some sort of quote unquote life in the eyes, even if the rest of the image is kind of mediocre, if the eyes look good, the rest of your image will look good. Trust me on this. Here I'm going to make sure that I add the proper shadows for tentacles that are behind one another. I'm not just drawing a straight line of a shadow either, because remember, his tentacles are supposed to be glowing and his head is supposed to be glowing. So I am going to vary the depth of the shadows as well, because just because the tentacle is behind another one, if that tentacle is glowing, it's not going to cast a super hard shadow. It's actually going to be emitting light from it. So just little things to think about. And for this octopus, I don't have the footage coloring underneath the tentacles or the eyes. I do have it for our second octopus though, so we'll go over that technique for our next octopus. But we're going to go ahead and jump forward now to the majority of this octopus done. I'm just going to show you how I add detail underneath the tentacles. Okay, so I've put a brighter yellow underneath all of the tentacles, and now I am just going to take the E19 here, I believe is what I'm using, and add a couple of dots. This is going to be it's E15 correction. This is just going to be like those little suction cup things underneath the tentacles. I have no clue what they're called, and I haven't bothered to Google it. I apologize, but I don't know what they're called. We're calling them suction cups. So after I do the dots, I'm just going to take and create little half circles, these little C's, the letter C, little half circles on either side of those dots, and it's going to give the illusion of a suction cup without actually being a full circle. I want to give the impression of a circle without actually showing the full circle. And this is because we're not seeing the full underside of his tentacle. So we're only maybe seeing 1/3 of it on some places, maybe just 1/8 of it. So I am going to make it more prominent in some areas and then much less so in others. So I'm kind of looking at it right now, and I decided I need a few where it's kind of very obvious. So I'm just going to add a few areas right here where you maybe see a whole edge of that suction cup to further give that illusion that these are protruding from underneath the tentacle. And I was much happier with that. Is it 100% accurate? No. Does it give me the impression of what it is and my mind fills in the blank? Absolutely. So that's all you really need to do, is kind of give the suggestion and the viewer's eye will fill in the rest. Okay, so moving on to our second octopus. Now my first one, it felt a little derpy, a little cartoony, but I really wanted to see if I could bring some more realism to this. The illustration style of this has a lot of detail packed into it. And so I decided, you know what, I'm going to do the shading with grays first, where I kind of map in all of my shadows. I'm going to pick and choose what details I want to retain from the stamp, and then I'm going to map those in with grays. So you can see here, I'm going around the eyes, I'm going under the eyes, kind of following a lot of what the artist has drawn into the stamp, just going over some of those areas where they've created some shading with their hatch lines or their extra bold lines, and I'm just mapping in my shadows. Now my octopus is going to look a little angry because we've only got the shading in there, and it does look like he's kind of giving us a little scowl there, but trust me, it'll all work out in the end. Again, this is just an underlayment of shadow. So any color that I put over top of this, it's going to darken that color in the areas where I've already laid in my shadows using the grays. So sometimes this can be a great shortcut, especially if you're doing no line coloring. It can be really easy to lose your detail of your stamp. So by going in and mapping in the shadows, you make sure that you are retaining the detail of the stamp, because once you start to add that color, trust me, it's easy to lose track of what's what. This will help us keep that shape and that form of the octopus while we're adding in the color on top. And if you've not seen this technique before, I have a full video on doing the shading with gray before adding color. I'll have that linked in the description box as well. But for now, we're going to go ahead and move into adding the color. So I've got all of my shadows mapped in here. I've blended them out. And now any color that we put on top will retain the depth of color because, like I said, these are transparent. So when we layer them over, anything underneath does have a chance to shine through. So I'm starting this time with my darks. Last time I started with my light, the yellow. This time I'm starting with my dark, which is the RV66. I might go a little bit darker than this in the end, but for now, I'm thinking of this as my shadow color, and I'm going right over the darkest parts where I laid in my shading previously with the grays. I'm not drawing solid lines. Again, I'm matching the intensity of the grays here and how I blended them out. Now, once I've laid down that RV66, I'm going to use the RV25 to pull that RV26 down into the lighter shadowed areas. So you can see here, I'm taking my time a little more so on this one. I'm really thinking through my shadows and my highlights, and I am going to try to capture, I don't want to say realism because we still go with a very fantastical, is that a word? Very fantasy-like octopus here. However, I do want to retain a lot more of the detail than we did in the previous octopus. So here I'm grabbing that RV66 and I'm mapping in a little bit of the darker shadows. Again, I'm using the grays that I laid down previously as my guide for where my darks, my midtones, and my lights will go. So you might have noticed that this time I'm working from dark to light, whereas for the last octopus, I worked from light to dark. There is no wrong or right way to do this. I know some people will swear by going light to dark. Others will say always do dark to light. I say do whatever feels right for you and switch between them. It just depends on the day and how I feel as to which order I work in. I do whatever strikes my fancy on that particular day. There are no rules to art, you guys. There's design principles, but there are no rules, and don't let anybody tell you any different. Do what feels right and works for you, and try different things because you'll never know what you enjoy doing unless you try it. So here I am trying to retain a little bit more of the detail that was illustrated into the stamp. So I'm going to go in here, just kind of continue to map in some of the shadowed areas using my midtone. I don't want to go too dark at this point because once I go dark, it's hard to lift that color back out. So I'm just going to map in some shadows with my midtones. And this particular octopus, the majority of him is going to be yellowy orange. So we're not going quite as colorful as we did with the last octopus. And he's going to have just kind of this pinkish purpley glow around the very edges. So this time our shadow color is going to be kind of a magenta color. But I'm going to have a lot of yellow on this guy. So I'm going to leave a lot of highlight area for that yellow. So you'll notice this time around, I am going to very slowly build up my shadows, leaving a lot of open space for my yellow, which will eventually be my highlight. I don't want to eat up all of my highlight space right away because it's going to be almost impossible to get that back if I go over it with darker colors. So I'm going to take my time really, and I'm going to creep into that highlight with my shadow rather than laying down big bold shadows right out of the gate. Now there is a little trick that you can use to reinforce your highlights, which I will show here at the end. We're going to use a little bit of that on both of our images, but that will only, that'll only get you so far. So I always like to err on the side of caution and leave more room for a highlight than I think I need, because I can always add more color to close it up if need be. Now we're not going to color this entire image. I'm going to show you how to do a couple of these tentacles, and then we'll skip ahead to the underside of the tentacles and the eyes on this particular octopus. I got to tell you, Copic coloring videos are always my hardest to voice over because I don't really have a methodology, or I don't have a methodology when it comes to Copic coloring. I don't have a favorite color combo. I don't always work with the exact same colors. You'll notice that I don't have 3 colors of the same family. Like I'm not using an YRO2, a YRO4, and then a YRO6. I jump around. I jump around a lot with my colors. I blend things that aren't necessarily, you wouldn't think to blend right out of the gate. I do a lot of glazing. So if I want to shift it, if I wanted to shift a little bit of green into here, I wouldn't necessarily go grab a green marker. I already have that BGO2 out. And just like you saw me do in the last octopus, I would just glaze that over some of the yellow to achieve a green. So I think that when you're working with Copics, a lot of people feel like they have to have all of the Copic markers, and you do not need all of the Copic markers. You guys have seen me color both of these octopuses, and especially the first one, we had the whole rainbow of colors, but I didn't use a giant bunch of markers. I mean, I used one small handful of markers. I showed you in the beginning what we used, and I honestly don't think I added in any other markers to that one. I think I added one more, which was maybe the BG07, but other than that, we started off with what, like 6, 7 markers? And they were from all different color families. So don't think that you have to have every single marker to have good results. You don't. As long as you remember your color wheel, you'll remember how to blend colors, and don't forget that you can glaze. So as long as you have a pink, a yellow, and a blue, you can make all the colors of the rainbow. And this is true for just about any medium, whether it's the alcohol markers, Copic markers, Olo markers, true for watercolor, acrylic paints, all that good stuff. Especially if you're working with a transparent medium like your alcohol markers or your watercolors. You can do a whole lot with very little colors. All right, so you've seen me color that first tentacle. I'm going to repeat the same process for all of these tentacles on the octopus. The main color is going to be yellow. That yellow is going to move into that orange, and then we're going to hit it with a little bit of the RVs in the shaded spots. The tips of the tentacles, I'm moving more toward that RV66, blending that out with the RV24, I think. And then where I want it to turn orange, a lot of the times I'm just using that yellow to glaze over that pink. And once I've kind of solidified my process there for the tentacles, I'm just going to repeat that same thing for each tentacle, just paying attention to any areas that need to be darker. So like the tentacles that are behind another one, I'll just add a little bit more of an orange and a pink to that one to make it look a little recessed. Anywhere that the tentacles are coming at me, I'm going to make those brighter. Anywhere they're going away from the viewer, you're going to make those a little less bright, a little more shaded. Now on this one, I did want to add a little bit of green to it because we did add some green to our other octopus, and I knew these were going to be a set, kind of photographed together. So I did bring in a little bit of that BGO2 in areas and kind of glaze it with that yellow, and that's going to give me that green. And I know it's going to match perfectly. It's going to be the same color green in our other card because I used the same 2 colors, the BGO2 and then the Y03, Y11, the Ys. You know what I'm saying. All right, so I'll continue this all the way around, and now we can take a look at coloring underneath the tentacles and the eyes of our octopus. All right, so for the underneath of the tentacles, I was a little torn at first. I really wanted to do them blue underneath because as a standalone image here, the blue being the opposite of orange would look fantastic underneath underneath the tentacles. They would really pop. However, I knew as a composition as a whole, this octopus was going to go on a blue background. So I didn't want those tentacles to get lost So I opted to go with the RVs for our tentacles instead, the underneath part, the little suction cup areas. So what I'm going to do first here is I'm just taking RV02 and I am dotting in a guide. This is where each of my little suction cup thingies are going to be. So I'm just dotting that in with RV02, and this will just be my placeholder for, you know, about where each of those little suction cups are going to be. Again, we can't see a lot of these, so it doesn't have to be perfect, doesn't have to be perfectly spaced. We're just giving the suggestion of these suction cups on the bottom here. Then I came in with RV23 and I'm going to fill in the spaces between each of those little dots. Now you don't have to, you know, painstakingly fill this in. It doesn't have to be perfect. Again, such a small area and we are just creating the suggestion of these little suction cups on the bottom. So I'm using that RV23. I'm going to fill in the areas between each of my little dots. And then eventually I'm going to come in with the RV66 and fill in my shadows. And I'll go back and forth between my colors because sometimes I may need to reinforce something, but for the most part, I'm not being overly critical here. Taking the RV66 and I'm just going to add in some suggestions of some shadows here. So right up underneath where the tentacle is meeting the body, I'm going to put a little line of it there. I'm going to put just a little line of it at the top where the tentacle meets the underneath, where the top of the tentacle, where the top of the tentacle ends and the bottom of the tentacle starts. Where need be, I will smooth that transition out with that RV23, just so that it's not a harsh line. And then for the final step, I will come in and create those little C curves to give the illusion of those suction cups protruding from the bottom of the tentacle. And remember, this is very, very small area and it's going to be really easy to try to pack too much into here. This is one of those instances where less is more. So I'm going to take now this RV66 and just make some suggestions of the little round circles down here. And then I'm going to repeat the same process for all of the rest of the tentacles. So moving on to the eyes here, instead of just coloring these solid black, I do want to add a little bit of depth and a little bit of light to them. So I'm going to start by putting in just a little bit of a blue. And here I think I'm going to use B28 if I remember correctly. But I'm just going to create a little sweep of this blue at the bottom of each of the pupils. Well, I don't even know if these are pupils. I don't know what octopus eye parts are called. Maybe I need to do some more research. But I'm going to do a little bit, the black portion of the eye, I'm going to do a little bit of blue. This is just going to add a little bit of luminosity. In the end, does it really show up? In person, you can see it. On camera, not so much. So for the rest of the area of the eye, I'm going to fill that in with C7, leaving just a little highlight, a little bit of white. If you close up that white, don't worry about it. We can use a white gel pen at the end to add it back in. But I usually like to try to leave it if I can. So I'm going to leave a little area of white, and then I'm going to do the same thing on the other eye. Fill in the rest of that with that C7, leaving a little bit of a white space for reflection, a little bit of light reflection on that eyeball. All right, for the outer area of the eyes here, I'm going to make the bottom part of the eye orange or darker because, you know, it's the bottom area. And then for the top area, I'm going to make it yellow, but I don't want it to be like yellow hardline orange. So I'm going to just merge those two together, making sure to keep the top area lighter and brighter and more in the yellow range, and then having the bottom area get darker into the orange range. Again, we're just following the contour. They themselves are rounded, and then they're on a surface that is rounded. So that way, if I just follow those shadows that we have mapped out on the rest of the octopus, so on the sides there where the eyes are to the left and right sides of the eyes, we make those a little bit darker in shadow, the underneath a little bit darker in shadow, and then at the very top we get lighter where there is a highlight. hitting the tops of the eyes. Now, and to further enforce the shadows or the creases in these areas, I'm going to come in with the YR24 and then just add a little bit of depth into some of those creased areas. And then that's going to finish him off. All right, so off camera, I went ahead and colored in some of the seaweed, the coral, some of that ocean plant life. And now comes the fun part. We're going to use our gel pen here. Now, this is a 7, I believe. A 7 Signo, nope, not Signo, Sakura Jelly Roll pen. And we're going to add a more intense highlight and then some sparkles using this pen. So you can see here, I am using a stippling technique to just tap a series of dots onto the highest or the brightest point of this octopus. So I want the very center of his forehead to be the brightest. So I'm just adding a series of dots of white ink here, very closely packed together. If I get it too white, I can just take my finger and kind of dot it off. That's going to lift off some of the ink, make it a little less bright. So you can see me doing that there. I just kind of tap it. But basically, where the dots are concentrated tighter together, it's going to appear brighter or lighter. And then as I get away from that central highlight point, I'm going to space the dots further apart and then just kind of have some here and there. That's going to give this like almost a sparkle effect. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to concentrate tight little dots everywhere I want the highlight to be the brightest. So on the very edge of his head where it might be glowing, and then in the very center of his head where it's really, really bright. And then I'm going to take and I'm just going to add that same stippling all over the highest, the brightest points of his tentacles, around his eyes, anywhere that I want to add an extra bright light or a sparkle. And it's really this technique right here that brings this whole thing to life and really adds to that whole magical fantasy feel. And I really enjoyed this part. After my hand cramping from Copic coloring for so long, which I guess 2 hours really isn't that long, but I don't do a whole lot of Copic coloring, you guys. I'm much more of a watercolorist. I do love to use Copics, and I used to use them more often. But like I said, my hands have just been bothering me. So this part right here was a lot of fun, and it kind of gave my hand a little break. But and as I saw this coming to life, as I was doing it, I was getting so excited because I just knew, that these cards were going to turn out absolutely gorgeous. So let's go ahead and take a look at doing the backgrounds for these cards. And these are so easy to do. I'm working on distressed watercolor cardstock, and I'm working on the smooth side here. This is a technique that I used to do a lot, and I have not done it in a long time, and I thought this would be the perfect opportunity to do this one on camera. So I've pulled out Mermaid Lagoon, Salty Ocean, salvaged patina, and then antique linen and brushed corduroy. I'm going to do the ocean bottom, the floor, the sand, and then the ocean at the top here. The other card background is done the exact same way, except there is no ocean floor on that one. So I'm going to grab the Picket Fence paper pouncers here. This is by far the best method of application that I have found so far. I used to do this with the sponge applicators, the distress sponge applicators, but I did have to work a little bit harder to get the amount of ink down that I wanted without getting too much ink. If you go direct to paper, you're going to have too much ink. And if you ink blend this on, it's going to take you a while to get the amount of ink on the cardstock that you need. So the paper pouncers are perfect for this. They apply a decent amount of ink pretty quickly. So I'm grabbing that paper pouncer and just pouncing some antique linen on here in the area-ish that I want the ocean floor to be. Then I'm going to grab a little bit of brushed corduroy because it is a little bit darker, a little bit more red. I want some variation in here. And I'm going to pounce that into the corners, a little bit in what would be the distance of the ocean floor there at the background. I'm tilting my sponge on the side so I get a smaller line of it. And then I'm going to come in with the larger pouncers in the new ocean blues and ocean greens. Now these are their regular size paper pouncers. They're quite large, so they're going to cover a ton of real estate really quickly. I'm starting with the salvaged patina. I'm going to hit this a little bit where the bottom of the ocean floor is meeting the ocean here, a little bit up in the corner. Again, I'm just going for some variation of color here because we're going to flood this with water, and you'll see what I mean in a minute. I just want all of this color represented in the background so that when I do add the water, it's all going to flow together and give me this very organic look that is almost impossible to achieve if you're trying to do it. All right, so this is one of the only times that I use a water brush. You guys know that I love a regular paintbrush and separate water, but here, this is perfect for flooding this with water. I hold it up over the surface and squeeze it and just let that water pour out onto the paper. Now I'm using the tip of that brush to just kind of swipe back and forth in a curved motion up there at the top. So you can see I just kind of run the tips of that brush through, back and forth through the ink there. And anywhere that the wet bristles go through the dry ink, it's going to push that ink away and create almost like streams of light going through the water there. And then I'm also going to kind of just shake the brush up and down and let the water flow out of the tip of that brush to create splatters. Here I'm doing the same thing in the bottom of the floor of the ocean here. I've flooded that middle area with water, and then I am just moving my paper back and forth to encourage that water to flow and mix and create these beautiful blooms and things that you can't do purposely. It's kind of one of those that it's best left to chance. And once I'm happy with the way it looks, I'm going to take my heat tool and just go ahead and dry this down. I can help it out anywhere I feel like it needs help as it's drying. I can just use that wet water brush again to kind of reactivate the ink, move it anywhere that I think it needs to be moved. And then once this is all dry, we are ready to start assembling our card. And I've used the You Occupy My Thoughts companion die to die cut my pieces here. And originally I thought I was only going to make one card, and I was deciding between which octopus to use because honestly, when I first did the first octopus, I wasn't happy with it, which is why I did the second octopus. And it wasn't until my youngest said that he actually liked the first octopus better that I decided to make the second card. So for now, we're going to concentrate on the first card, and for that, we're going to use the Find Me by the Sea die here. And since we're going to have so much color going on this card already, we're going to leave these completely white, and it's going to stand out beautifully, and it's also going to incorporate the white borders that we have on our die. It's going to incorporate those, and it's not going to make them look out of place. So I will show you the second card at the end, but for now we're going to concentrate on this card. All right, so I've got all of my pieces and parts, and we're going to start playing around with, how I want to arrange this. Originally, I wanted the octopus on top of the sea. So I wanted him to rest right on top of sea and then have that Find Me by the Sea at the top. The only problem was that in a portrait card, the way this one was laid out, the Find Me by the Sea didn't quite, it was too long to set up there at the top. I do really love the arrangement of the octopus sitting on top of this, and I think if I had like a you soon sub-sentiment, so it said see you soon, and I could put the you soon right there underneath the C, I think that would be perfect. However, for this one, I was dead set on Find Me by the. And sometimes when you have an idea, you can't see outside of what you want to do. you can't. It's hard to scratch the idea, if that makes sense. You're like, nope, this is how I want it. This is what I want to use, and I'm going to make it work. But looking at this, all of a sudden, I see it clear as day. I could have done see you soon, and then it would fit perfectly down there in between the coral right under the sea. But I digress. So I wanted Find Me by the Sea, and so I played around with ways to arrange this. The nice thing is these are all different words, right? They're all separate. It's not one big long word, so I can play around with the arrangement here. I've left this part in because in past videos when I leave in the process of figuring out the layout, you guys seem to really enjoy it. So I've left it in here. You can see me tapping my fingers. Now I'm looking through the other sentiments. I'm seeing if there's anything else that'll work. But I'm still unsure, right? So I'm like, could I put this down here to finish the sentiment? I don't know. Don't love it. So now I've decided, let me move these all down right above the large C sentiment, and maybe I can fit the octopus above that. Well, I didn't really love that either. Then it looked all disjointed and weird. So I was like, well, let me stack it vertically. Maybe if I stack, okay, we're onto something. I'm like, this could work. Okay, I like the flow. I like how the tentacle will go in between the E and the S, or maybe even hang over the E. So I'm getting closer here. Sometimes, even though you have an idea, you just got to keep massaging it. You got to massage it until it's just perfect, right? And that's what I ended up doing. So eventually I did end up settling on arranging these vertically. This is almost there. This is almost there, but I had a large dead space at the top of the card. I didn't really love that. So I ended up putting each of the letters or each of the words on a different line. So it was find, break, me, break, by, break, the. Stacked vertically, and then they followed the contour of the octopus perfectly. And I liked this much better. So all that was left to do was to adhere this, and I used the good old press and seal trick to adhere. You guys have seen this a million times. If you haven't seen it before, make sure to do a search on my channel for press and seal, and they should come up. Otherwise, I will have one linked in the description box below. So now that we've seen how to create all of the pieces and parts, let's take a look at the finished cards. And y'all, I could not be happier with how these turned out. They were a labor of love, but like I said, I was working on them in between hospital visits, so they really provided an escape and something for me to focus on to kind of drown out any worry. It's one of the many, many reasons why I love art so much. So I'm not going to go too much over this one because we just assembled this one together, but here you can see how all of those little white stippling highlights really adds a magical sparkle to this. And I think that the color palette is just divine. Now for the second one, we used a lot of all of the same techniques as we used in the first one. Here in the background, we did that same watery inky background. I colored all of the coral the same, except for I did come in afterwards and do a halo effect by blending some dark blues, purple, and even black here at the bottom. For the sea, I did the same technique as I did on the head of our octopus there by using that yellow into that orange and then adding that white gel pen stippling over top. Then I added a little bit of stippling also around the ocean to add that little sparkle. Again, love how these turned out. If you've made it this far, I want to thank you guys so much for sticking around. Hopefully this was one that you enjoyed. And if you did, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. And if you're looking for anything that I used today, be sure to check the description box below. I'll also have those other videos mentioned linked. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe. It really helps with the algorithm. All right, guys, as always, I want to thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye.